I'm sure some of you are familiar with this interview from many years ago, but there's a reason I'm starting this video by sharing a bit of it with you before we move on to the priest clips.
Well, we believe in vengeance. We don't believe in turning the other cheek. You keep turning the other cheek and you run out of cheeks. We feel that if you are wronged in some way, that you take it out with the person responsible, whether that's directly or indirectly, whether that's actually going to the person and addressing the problem or the issue specifically, or whether it's working it out through ritual.
I would think your selfish ego is a healthier gauge of reality than some moral system. We're getting back to our animal natures. We are beasts, and we decide from gut instinct. In our case, we are making up our reality. We decide what's right and wrong. You are letting the Bible or Jesus Christ or whatever God may be. The thing is, you speak for a consensus of reality which is acceptable. We speak for one which at this point in history is not acceptable.
Now compare what those two said with this clip from Father Iannuzzi. It's a very good reminder for everyone listening.
So, mortification and sufferings. Sufferings can be imposed on us without our consent. Mortifications are taken upon ourselves, whether they're imposed by others or whether they're freely done by ourselves. The point is we willingly embrace them and offer them up. This in turn yields compassion. People that have no sensitivity toward the suffering of others. And there are a lot of people out there today that don't have God, that don't have hope, faith, love, and therefore they don't have compassion because they don't offer up their mortifications, their sufferings. And as a result, they become hardened of heart. So if a person is without compassion, it means they don't know how to offer up their mortifications to God.
As we're nearing the end of the year, I wanted to share a few clips with you for us to reflect on together. Some of the highlights from Father Iannuzzi that I've shared with you this year, and we've certainly learned a lot together.
Remember, to God there is no time, but to us there is. We must forge our loyalty on the anvil of trials and tests and difficulties. This is what's known as the cross. All inconveniences are the cross of Christ that we are asked by God to offer up while impacting for the betterment of all creation, every thought, word, action that it was ever made, of all creatures, even motions of all creatures. For the soul's complete act is the complete act of God Himself.
And remember, even though we see a lot of sinful things happening around us today in our generation, I hope we will always remember this.
This is indeed the greatest generation in the history of mankind, inasmuch as this generation, apart from all the rest, has been given the greatest gift of all time. How about that? We can consider our generation at one and the same time the worst and yet the greatest generation ever, because we are given the greatest test and yet at the same time the greatest blessing for those who pass the test. We are living in times of great confusion, ecclesial confusion, theological confusion, moral confusion, political confusion, great confusion in all areas, a confluence of confusion. How do we know what the right path to take is, if not by sound Christian principles imparted to us? The soul's correspondence to whatever gifts God gives it determines their greatness. God sees each and every one according to their correspondence to the gifts God gives them. God does not demand of all souls the same response. This is a clear, solid, grounded Catholic and Christian teaching, and is founded in the Bible as well. Remember where Jesus spoke of Master giving more stripes, meaning lashes, to a person because they knew but failed to act upon God's will that they knew, and giving less stripes or lashes to a person because they did not know the Father's will and failed to do it. So here Jesus is telling us that with knowledge comes responsibility. With gifts comes responsibility. And without them, there's less responsibility.
And this particular reminder about how we should move forward in these days of confusion is still a very good one for you and me. Listen to this.
So first thing we must do in these days of confusion, in these end times, is form our conscience through the unchanging doctrine of the church, Christ's church, not our church, God's church. Number two, we must find those who are faithful to the teachings of Christ's church. Find those who are faithful to the magisterium and listen to them. Don't follow those who attack the church's doctrine, who attack the magisterium. You have to always be loyal to Christ's church. Remember, it's not our church, it's his. And then, of course, we have to be vigilant on allowing only good sources to influence our minds. So we should not go running around on this internet blog or this internet site trying to create a potpourri or a melting pot of different spiritualities, devotions that contradict each other. You know, I see the websites out there that throw everything together, good and bad. And it's like, pick for yourself, choose for yourself. And I've written people on these blogs saying this is bad. There are several out there. They post the latest news without discerning whether or not this is of God, with things that are approved by the church. So you have an admixture. This confuses us. It's better to avoid these blogs altogether and stick to only those or these websites or these sources that are faithful to church's magisterium. Otherwise, we're going to be confused, like headless chickens running around, never growing spiritually. And this is also why the church has taught since time immemorial that we shouldn't be mixing together all these different devotions into one thing. This is spiritual. This causes spiritual indigestion. And there's no heartburn pill that can fix it except just stopping it. And this is why the church since time immemorial has kept distinct different spirituality. So you have the Benedictine, whose spirituality is prayer and work, ora et labora. Then you have the Franciscans, whose spirituality is poverty. Then you have the Dominicans, whose spirituality is preaching, and the list goes on. So you don't see a Benedictine and a Franciscan and a Dominican mixing each other's devotions, do you? Well, that same thing, same teaching of the church applies to us. And it's even worse when you bring in unapproved revelations that are on websites that the church has not even acknowledged, only to find out later that the bishop condemned it, or this one condemned it, and you say, oh, all right. And we can make reference to these other ecclesiastically approved revelations, that's fine. But when they're not approved, we have to be very careful. But don't start throwing in all these other devotions because it gets confusing. You can do those separately, that's fine. Okay? So in these end times, this is, I believe, how the church teaches us to keep our focus, not be confused despite all the confusion out there, and remain loyal to Christ by trusting in this gift of his eternal act, which is operating in our every thought, word, and action, and everything we think say.
And many times this year I have also shared clips on the era of peace, but for this revision I'll simply share this relatively short clip with you.
Saint Pope John Paul II's encyclical, dedicated to the third Christian millennium, which affirms that Christianity is on the threshold of a new springtime that brings with it, in quotes, a rediscovery of the Church's holiness, unquote. Now, what does the Pope mean by that? And what it means is a rediscovery of the gift that Adam and Eve possessed. This is what this expression of Pope John Paul II means. A rediscovery of the Church's holiness is nothing other than a rediscovery of the holiness of the complete act that Adam and Eve enjoyed in Eden that has been suspended for 6,000 years and has being imparted to this generation, the most blessed in all human history. I would go so far as to say this generation is more blessed than even the future generations. Why do I say that? Because they will not have as many tests as we have now. We are going through the greatest battle in mankind's history, which will never be superseded ever again, in its intensity and its duration. And because of that, there's greater holiness. The greater the challenge, the greater the prize. And this battle that we are experiencing now will yield an abundant harvest, a new era in the life of the church, a springtime of Christianity, whereby Satan will be enchained and God's kingdom will reign on earth as in heaven. Now, this is not millenarianism, but this is really what Our Lady refers to at Fatima as the era of peace, which she promised she would also help Jesus impart to the world, when she said many nations would be annihilated, but in the end, I will give to the world an era of peace, and my Immaculate Heart will triumph.
And the last clip for our revision this time, it's going to be quite long, but if you have the time, please listen to this. And I hope all of you have learned or relearned quite a lot from this video.
So, mortification and sufferings. Sufferings can be imposed on us without our consent. Mortifications are taken upon ourselves, whether they're imposed by others or whether they're freely done by ourselves. The point is we willingly embrace them and offer them up. This in turn yields compassion. People that have no sensitivity toward the suffering of others. And there are a lot of people out there today that don't have God, that don't have hope, faith, love, and therefore they don't have compassion because they don't offer up their mortifications, their sufferings. And as a result, they become hardened of heart. So if a person is without compassion, it means they don't know how to offer up their mortifications to God. And Bishop Sheen was a great champion of encouraging people to do just that when he worked for the Propaganda Fide Institute. He would fly throughout the world to various countries, and the first place he said he would go, and he landed, would be the nursing homes, the hospitals. And he would tell the people who were suffering and dying, don't waste your suffering. It's of redemptive and salvific value. Offer it up to God. Don't waste it. How many people are cursing God, suffering in these hospitals, wasting their suffering, blaspheming, hating, because they had a poor plight in life and they don't see the will of God in it, so they curse God. And this compassion, the fruit of offering up of mortifications and sufferings, brings about purity of mind and body. And the soul that operates with a pure intention allows Jesus to operate within it with his own virtues and aids in the conversion of other souls. Jesus reveals, I greatly love pure souls, just as I am forced to flee from the impure. I am drawn by the pure as by a magnet to dwell in them. To pure souls I gladly lend my mouth to let them speak with my own tongue. And that is why they need not expend any effort in converting souls. This is important. Pure souls do not need to expend any effort in converting souls. With these pure souls, Jesus states, I delight not only in continuing my passion within them to perpetuate my work of redemption, but more importantly, I greatly delight in glorifying in them my own virtues. Now back to the soul, not expending any effort in converting souls. The soul that is pure does not need to expend effort in converting souls. All right, now, Jesus in the Gospels talked to the apostles about having the authority in his name, not by any virtue of their own, of expelling demons, converting souls by casting demons out of them and returning them back to God. Now let's take one example from the Gospel of Mark chapter 9, verse 29. We come here across an unusual situation where the apostles, after having expelled demons from several individuals, fail in their attempt in this one particular case. Mark records a remarkable episode of Jesus casting out an evil spirit that his disciples could not cast out. The same episode contains Jesus' teaching about the importance of faith and trust. Now, there were other instances where the disciples were able to cast out demons, but Jesus explains that this demon they encountered, this particular demon, in Mark chapter 9, could only be cast out by prayer and fasting. And Jesus, in this episode, you must remember, was rejoining them after the transfiguration. This event happened right after the transfiguration, and a person in the crowd brought to Jesus his son, who he said was possessed by an evil spirit. And the demon in the boy made him mute and even tried to drown him and burn him with fire. And the man had brought his son to Jesus' disciples to cast out the spirit, but they were unable to do so. And Jesus rebuked the crowd for their unbelief, lack of faith, lack of trust, and told the man to bring the son to him. And when the son was brought to Jesus, the boy was thrown into a convulsion by the spirit that possessed him. And the man said to Jesus, if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us. Jesus turned the situation right back on the man, saying, if you can. So this man, the father of the boy, goes to Jesus and says, if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us. And Jesus looks at him and says, if you can, adding that all things are possible for one who believes, who trusts in God. And the man was not sure if Jesus could accomplish this task. You see, he doubted him. So Jesus challenged the man to win over his trust. See, Jesus can do anything he wants, but not without us on earth. This is the way God ordained things. God had preordained from eternity that although he could do anything without us, that he would not do so. So Jesus has to elicit from us faith, trust, hope, love, in order for him to work these miracles. And the man was not sure if Jesus could at this time, but Jesus challenged the man that his unbelief needed to turn into belief. If he would believe in Jesus, Jesus would resolve the situation, you see. And so what did the man reply to Jesus? He said, if you can, which doesn't express a very strong belief or trust. And Jesus was seeing that the large crowd was gathering around. And he commanded the spirit to leave the boy, never to enter again. And after more convulsions, the spirit left the boy, and he appeared initially as dead. Jesus took the boy's hand, lifted him up alive and well. But this spirit that had possessed this boy, whom Jesus had cast out, was unlike any other the apostles faced. They could not cast the spirit out. And Jesus would soon explain that this spirit could only be cast out by prayer and fasting. This reminds me of an episode with my mentor, Father Gabriel Lamworth. There was a woman in Bergamo, Italy, by the name of Giovanna, and her brother, a Salesian priest, brought her to Father Gabriel. This is back in the early 1990s, when I was in Italy, working with Father Lamworth. Because no matter how many times the priest and others prayed over her, they could not expel the spirit. Father Gabriel prayed over the girl many times. He could not expel the spirit. He also had others assist him as well, other exorcists. They could not expel the spirit from the woman. So Father Gabriel Lamworth, who was a great believer in Medjugorje, traveled to Medjugorje because he wanted to ask the Blessed Mother why they cannot cast the spirit out of this woman, Giovanna. So he spoke with Vitska, Father Gabriel Lamworth, and Vitska spoke with the Blessed Mother. And the Blessed Mother said to Vitska, this kind of spirit that Father Lamworth is trying to expel from this woman, who is innocent, who's a martyr, who's a victim, can only be cast out by prayer. Many rosaries before the Blessed Sacrament. Okay, the question now is, why can certain spirits can be cast out by the laying on of hands, by invoking the name of Jesus, whereas others are more resistant? And this exorcism must be repeated over and over again, many times. Remember even Jesus in the Gospel, with the blind man, spit in his eyes and laid hands over them. And Jesus asked the man, what do you see? He said, I see what appear to be trees that are moving. And then Jesus mixed spittle with mud and prayed over him a second time, and then his sight was fully restored. People ask, well, why did Jesus, couldn't Jesus have done this just once? Why did he have to pray over the man twice to get the full healing effect? Sometimes certain spirits that are persistent need repeated exorcisms. Jesus also used the mud, of course, to symbolize from whence man came, from the dust of the earth, recalling to mind God's creative activity in creation. So the dust mixing with spittle was a symbolic gesture. It was a metaphor. But the repetition also is not foreign to exorcists of a blessing. Sometimes the exorcist has to repeat a blessing, and this can go on for years. When Father Gabriel Lamworth was asked if a person is truly possessed, and we're talking here about a full-blown possession, not an obsession or an oppression or a vexation or an infestation, he said if it's a true possession, it can take, on average, up to 3 years of repeated exorcisms. Because it's not just one demon that is present in the soul. It's a legion. Legion is a lot of demons, and they have to be extracted, sometimes one by one, sometimes several in clusters. But at the time of Christ, each legion constituted 4,200 men. That's how much a legion was. And remember when Jesus asked, what is your name? The demons responded, we are legion because we are many. That is over 4,000 demons in one person. Now, I bring that up because the Lord talks about how when a person wants to obtain purity, they have to know how to offer up their mortifications, their sufferings that yield compassion. And this compassion brings about purity, and that this is something that is acquired through repetition. The measure the soul acquires compassion is the measure in which it offers up mortifications and sufferings, and as a result, it acquires the grace of purity. And the soul that operates with a pure intention allows Jesus to operate in it with his own virtues. And therefore Jesus said that. That is why the soul does not need to expend any effort in converting souls. The soul that is pure need not expend any effort in converting souls. So when Jesus approached this spirit that was very difficult to expel, that the apostles could not expel, he expended no effort. It happened immediately. Why? Because Jesus was the master at offering up his mortifications and sufferings. He was the master of compassion, both of which yielded purity. And that purity expends no effort in converting a soul and even expelling demons. And this explains why, in part, some saints who were not even men were exorcists and got rid of demons immediately, like Catherine of Siena. She was known to have just prayed over a person and the demons would leave immediately because she was a pure virginal soul. All right, now talking about trust, getting back to that theme. We are living in the end times and our trust is being tested. Our trust is being tested on all sides. I want you to consider that. The three pillars that will keep you on the straight and narrow and safe and protected, spiritually and even physically, are the Eucharist, the Blessed Mother, and the papacy. Remember St. Don Bosco's vision? These will never deceive you. They are guaranteed by Christ to not lie to you on matters of morals and faith, discipline, and governance of the Church. The Pope exercises these four powers. Only he does, no other bishop does. He has universal, supreme, and immediate authority that no bishop has. And this is why Don Bosco was given this vision as a foretelling of the times in which we're living, to remind us of the three pillars of our faith. The Pope was at the helm of the Church, represented by a huge vessel, and he was leading it toward the other pillars. Well, the Pope is a spiritual pillar, the papacy is, and these other two pillars, above which were the Eucharist and the Blessed Mother, were the object of the Pope's desire. He wanted to port the vessel, the Church, between the two. And did he do it? Yes, he did. There's the guarantee. So the Pope will port this vessel, but it's going through a turbulent struggle. So in the vision of Don Bosco, there were these other boats trying to take down the ship, and a Pope fell. The Pope fell. And another was elected, who was able to safely port this vessel at the safety harbor of the Eucharist and the Blessed Mother. And under the Blessed Mothers were the word Auxilium Christianorum in Latin, which means help of. That's her title in these end times. She's the help of us. And not only does God provide by means of these three pillars, so to speak, for our safety of the soul, but also of the body. Jesus tells us repeatedly throughout many approved prophetic revelations reserved for these end times that if you consecrate yourself and your family to the two hearts, to the Sacred and the Immaculate Heart of Jesus and Mary, you will be sealed by God's angels on the forehead with the sign of the cross to protect you from the day of the Lord's wrath. So you don't have to run to this or that so-called refuge which don't exist. This is another scam. You have to go here, you have to go there. No, God is not a God of geography. So if you're born in the West and you have to go there and you can't make it because you don't have the money for a ticket, oh, well, then you're going to die. Too bad. That's not how God works. God is omnipresent. He's not bound by time or space. So these people who are telling you, sell everything you have and run to this refuge, don't understand the Spirit of God, who operates wherever he wills. He breathes wherever he wills. He comes and goes. Jesus said the Holy Spirit is like wind. You don't know where it comes from, where it goes, but it's always there. At some point in time, you have to trust. I'll tell you a little story of a family I came across. I walked into the house and there was a woman and she had a statue of Jesus Christ on the mantle above the fireplace, a statue of Hare Krishna, a statue of Allah, which is, I don't know how she got that because not even the Muslims have an image of Allah, a statue of Buddha, a statue of Confucius, and the list goes on. And I walked in and I looked at her. I said, what is all this? She said, I figured if I don't get it right with Jesus, the other ones are going to save me. I looked at her, I started to laugh. I said, where's your confidence? Where's your trust? If you don't completely commit to God, then God's not going to completely commit to you. You have to at one point say, I give my faith, hope, love, my life in this world and in the next life. I give everything I have, own, and possess to you, and I never take it back. That is the kind of trust God is looking for, And that kind of trust is essential to live in God's divine will. So if there are those of you out there that are asking me, how do we know whether or not we're living in God's divine will? There's your answer. It's 100% total unconditional divine self-giving without ever taking back. Jesus refers to this in LaVey's volumes as immutability. You never change in your decision. You don't say, Jesus, I give you myself completely today, and then a cross or a setback comes up and you say, Jesus, why did you allow this to happen? And I'm partially like that myself, I admit it. I have very short-term spiritual memory. I'll say to the Lord, I remember saying to the Lord about a year ago, this day, Jesus, I'm ready to offer up any sacrifice to save souls. Lay it on me. I'm ready. Halfway through the day, I was offering up everything beautifully. And then I got distracted in a conversation. And then something else came up, and I took my mind, my vision, interior vision for a moment off of Christ. And then a cross hit me. And it was a heavy cross. And I said, Lord, what's going on here? Why are you permitting this thing? And then the words in my soul reminded me of what I gave the Lord early that day. And I said, oh, yeah, I did ask for this, didn't I? So immutability is that trait that enables us to commit never to renege.
And that is it for the video this time, and I just want to thank all of you for taking the time to be here and for your continuous support this year, and I really hope all of you have learned a lot here. And remember, if ever you have any feedback or suggestion, please let us know in the comments below. Anyway, if you like what we do and you'd like to support us, I left a link to our PayPal donation in the description box below, and from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for your continuous support, contributions, and prayers. And until the next one, thanks again for watching, and may God bless you.